loose by the empire because it become too costly to maintain it. I'm reinforced majorly in my view expressed over the last 8 years that Israel won't be a state in a very short period of time.
We've seen almost daily strikes, hypersonic missiles fired into Israel by Yemen's Ansar Allah. Back in December, Larry, we saw that the Ansar Allah movement claimed that they downed an F-18 U.S. fighter jet in the Red Sea. They've also said that they have fired on U.S. aircraft carriers, naval aircraft carriers in the Red Sea as well. Now, everyone's claiming that the resistance is dead right now, Larry, but I'm curious, what do you make of Yemen's response to this over this time as they also, the Yemeni people, demonstrate in the streets of hundreds of thousands, if not more than 1 million people in solidarity with Gaza?
Frankly, Danny, the Yemenis seem to me to be irrepressible, inexhaustible, and incredible. They just don't seem to be able to be beaten other than a land invasion by several powers or a nuclear attack. They seem incredibly able to adapt, and they always have. Let me paint a little bit, we're talking West Asia, but let me paint a little bit of a tapestry that I think I have woven over the last 2 or 3 years, going back to my notes with my students and notes I took when I was chief of staff at the State Department and elsewhere. I think the Yemenis are a good place to start because if you look back over history, you know, the 3,000 years that we know quite a bit about, and even the 2,000 and the 5,000 that we don't know a lot about, but we have a lot of conjecture, especially from archaeologists and people like that. If you look over it, you have people like the Yemeni. You have people who, for example, take on the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire, people like Vercingetorix and others, who play an incredible role in hindsight in bringing the end of the empire. And that might be the Yemenis' role right now, is to be, as I said, irrepressible and inexhaustible and just keep on fighting and fighting and fighting. I have no doubt, really, as a military professional who went to the Naval War College, who taught at the Naval War College, who has put this forward to his colleagues in the Navy for 2 decades now, that they're going to take out an aircraft carrier. Now, it might not be the Yemeni, but I put my money on them first and foremost right now, as long as we're not in a formal war with China, who will take out all of our aircraft carriers, probably in the first 90 days. And that's going to be, for the American people in the empire, a truly traumatic experience. The American people haven't been at war since 1865. Not really. World War II was fought over there, thank you very much. They have not seen this kind of thing in their lifetime, certainly, and even in their grandchildren and grandfathers and, great-grandfathers' lifetime. They haven't seen this sort of thing. 100,000 casualties in a 10-day period. Maybe 250,000 in a 10-day period, except we can't put that many troops in the field, Navy, Air Force, or otherwise, to get them killed. But a carrier goes down, it's 5,000 souls. It's the entire air wing. It's $16 billion. And I would say there will be more than one if we get in a conventional war with China or Russia or both of them together, or even Iran. Should the Houthis do that? Watch out for what we do back to the Houthis. Watch out for a land invasion that would then probably keep going into Iran. Now, the counter to that is what I'm hearing, and I'm hearing it from good sources, that the Iranians feel like, some of them anyway, that they're in such a pickle right now that they have opened secret talks. I assume they're secret, probably through Oman or Qatar or someone like that. I would vouchsafe Oman. And because they seem to be really good at offering good offices for really intractable problems. And we're working on a nuclear deal. And they are anticipating Donald Trump being the person to come in and, with a little truculence and a little bombast, at least maybe give them a deal that might lift some of the sanctions, which are, as with Syria before, doing a lot of damage in Iran. So that could throw a wrinkle into that if the Iranians are suddenly working with the empire and are not there to continue to support the Yemeni, because probably a precondition of the deal, one of them, would be that they stop their support for the Houthis. But I think that would be just temporary, because this is too volatile, and just if Israel is our attack dog, Israel will always keep the place roiled up because the empire thinks confusion is conducive to this arrestment of power shift. Confusion and chaos, I should say. You could call it the C squared, confusion and chaos. That's what we're doing in Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Romania. That's what we're doing in West Asia, in the Levant. And Israel, our attack dog can have Lebanon, it can have Gaza, it can have parts of Egypt, it can have Jordan, ultimately. If I were the king of Jordan right now, I'd be sweating bullets. When I read George W. Bush's 2002 National Security Strategy, a public document, not classified. And that strategy essentially said, anyone who rises even imperceptibly at the bottom of our mountain, we will smash with sanctions, with military power, or with both. And increasingly now, we will use our allies as proxies to do so. So I began to ask myself, why is this such an adamant position taken by clearly an administration that had provocation of 9/11 and other things, but more or less molding itself into what I've been seeing going on since World War II as a professor of that period? And I've come to the conclusion, and I'm trying to put this in a little bit more of a concrete format, but it basically says in 3,000 years of human history that we know most about, the incredible power in the world, if you will, political, cultural, informational, intelligence, military, all the elements of power we like to classify today belong to the East. And the sucking mechanism, if you will, the supportive mechanism, the cashier of that power was China. We like to forget that today, of course. They don't forget it. And I've been in their Central Party school. I know they don't forget it. What's happening today is after that power for 3 millennia lingered very powerfully and for a long time in the East, in about 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella started some navigational exercises we all know about, but most Americans haven't a clue as to what they really meant. That shifted or began to shift that power majorly. Europe was already trying to shift it, but it was not being very successful. What comes out of the New World, if you will, is the rape, pillage, and plunder of entire civilizations in North, Central, and South America at unbelievable, fathomless wealth characteristics. I mean, Spain was so rich, it ruined its gills, its business gills. It didn't need business anymore. It was so filthy rich. So the Spanish Empire grew, the French Empire grew, and most of all, the British Empire grew to be that one which had a motto that the sun never set upon it, which was preposterous. It certainly did. But it was one of the largest in terms of earthly expanse empires that the world had seen in all those now some 4,000 years. Well, along came America in 1945, and a unique empire was born. An empire that did indeed span the entire globe, that created military fiefdoms for the entire globe, put a 4-star general or admiral in charge of each of those fiefdoms, and most of all, invented by stealing the world's scientists and some of its own nuclear weapons. No empire in history, none, period, zilch, ever had the capability to destroy the human race as a repose to its diminishment in power. Mogul, Mongol, Ottoman, you name the empire, Eastern or Western Roman. None of them could do this, certainly not the British. We can. What are we looking at today? We're looking at a massive countershift. The power, political, cultural, informational intelligence is going back to the East, with China as a powerful magnet sucking it back to the East. 1 in 5 on the world surface is a Chinese. 2 in 5 is a Chinese or an Indian. 3 in 5 is an Asian. This is inexorable, and we're fighting it tooth and nail in this belt of chaos that we're creating from the Baltic to Chabahar and Bandar Abbas at the southern end of the Persian Gulf is our attempt to arrest this shift in power. And Israel is not a product of the Jewish lobby, as Mearsheimer and Walt say. I'm convinced of that now. They're our attack dog. They're doing precisely what the empire wants them to do in Southwest Asia. And as long as that goes on, they can probably seem themselves inexhaustible in carrying out what we want them to do. But I think it's going to end And I think it's going to end abruptly for this attack dog. And here's something people don't understand. We will cut that dog loose as fast as greased lightning if we have to. If it becomes inimical to this interest to stop this power shift, we'll cut Israel loose. And I think it might be getting close to that point where we cut them loose.
Yeah, well, that's why I wanted to start with Yemen in this region, because as you've talked about, Larry, this region of West Asia is so critical to cutting off the rise of this new world. And Yemen and Ansar Allah are seen as very small players in this regard, but they made themselves very, very big over the course of this last year, taking this, even in this moment of declared victory for the empire, what I call a temporary reprieve. They've continued their strikes on Israel. And we also have seen, Larry, that Israel itself is still in the best shape. We have reports of suicides way up in the Israeli Defense Forces. We also have reports that still there is no end in sight to what's going on in Gaza, not only because Israel wants to destroy the entire place, but also because Palestinians are fighting back. What's your take on this narrative then? Because a lot of people are saying the opposite of what you're saying, that Israel's end is actually nowhere near in sight anymore, especially after the fall of Syria.
Those are all good points, but I think they are generated chiefly by the propaganda machine that First Jerusalem has, which is unsurpassed. It's just pure lies, but they propagandize those lies really effectively. And the propaganda machine that the empire has, which has a lot more territory to concentrate on, if you will, than Israel. Netanyahu the other day talking about how little Israel was and putting the maps up. I wanted to say, you little son of a bitch. Of course you're little, but look what you've got behind you. You've got the American empire behind you with 750 military bases in the spans of the world and nuclear weapons. So the propaganda machine of Israel is just unmatchable. But the empire does a pretty good job too. And you've got situations now in this country where my people whom I talk to on a daily basis sometimes question the things that people like Scott Ritter, Doug McGregor, and I and others say, and they don't know what they're talking about, and they don't know what they're talking about. You parse it closely with them because they're getting their information from the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and a host of other media outlets in this country that are wholly owned by the empire. That's the problem in this country in terms of getting the word to average Americans. Once you get an average American down who has even a modicum of common sense and maybe a little education, and you talk to them seriously about the situation, you can get them to begin to think and to begin to question what's happening. But it's tough. You've got to almost go one at a time. So as long as these propaganda machines exist and are fueled with the huge amounts of money, one thing I didn't point out is watching all of this shift, this power shift, watching all of it as the Rothschilds, for example, watched it in a previous century, as J.P. Morgan watched it in a previous century. All of these people, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Group, they have names now, are already relocated almost completely to Davos. And they will relocate to capitals in the new powers of the world when they feel it's necessary. So watch those financial capitals and those financial people and what they do and where they go and where their money winds up, because that's the real teller of when this shift is taking on unstoppable dimensions. And I think that's what we're seriously worried about. And our debt does not give us at all a high ground to stand on to do this.
Larry, do you think that Ansar Allah, the Houthis, that they downed the F-18 fighter jet reported in December?
I looked into it as far as I could. My contacts aren't as good as they used to be, but I thought it was maybe a Vincennes type incident. You remember when Vincennes, 88, I think it was, shot down the Iranian Airbus in the Persian Gulf. The CIC got Combat Information Center, Command Information Center got confused, and at least that's what the record seems to reflect, and shot down and killed 177 Iranian civilians, as I recall. So it's not impossible that we could have shot the aircraft down ourselves with a confused CIC, especially if a lot of missiles were coming in and such. But the more I look at it, the more I think the Houthis might be truthful, that they actually shot the aircraft down. And of course, the empire wouldn't admit it.
Right now, the situation in West Asia, it has that look to it that you have just described. Everyone right now is anointing Israel essentially invincible. They've expanded into Syria. Iran is, as you said, regrouping and looking toward possible negotiations to ease its own situation. At the same time, though, you had Iran's supreme leader talk about how a lot of these, the axis of resistance has its own domestic capabilities. And Hezbollah, even though after the ceasefire, there's been this narrative spread that Hezbollah was defeated, Hezbollah is saying through Sheikh Qassam that after the 60-day ceasefire, it is very possible that there is a resumption of the armed resistance to Israel, given the violations and given all the indications that Israel has no intention of letting Lebanon alone. So what do you make of this overall situation for Israel? Like, do you see, you've made the point many times that, you know, Israel is in a lot more dire situation than maybe is led on in the mainstream media. Do you see that continuing here forward into 2025 as the 60-day ceasefire in Lebanon stops, as Yemen continues its strikes on Israel, and as, of course, there are talks, and there will be talks, it seems like in 2025, of possible attack on Iran, as these recent Biden leaks seem to indicate?
I'm reinforced majorly in my view expressed over the last 8 years, particularly over the last 2 years, that Israel won't be a state in a very short period of time. The attack dog will be cut loose by the empire because it will become too costly to maintain it. Part of the reasons I say that are what you just suggested. There are tactical and operational reasons to suggest that. There hasn't been a ceasefire with Lebanon. Israel has violated the ceasefire every day. The only reason they quieted down and agreed to, quote, a ceasefire, unquote, was because we asked them to help us with Syria. And Turkey concurred. So they had to divert a few forces and, we can take lots of the Golan that we don't presently have? Let's go. So they got this ceasefire going, but they never stopped killing Lebanese every single day, or bombing this or bombing that every single day. Not as extravagantly as they were bombing Syria, for example, but they never ceased fire. Hezbollah did, to a certain extent, a few people cross here, cross there, giving the Israelis their excuses for violating the ceasefire. But Hezbollah needed the time to rearm and re-equip, and probably to retrain some people. They've learned some things with regard to how they pretty readily defeated the Israelis in their incursion. Not quite as effectively as 2006, but they did, I think, achieve more success than the Israelis did against them. They want to repeat that and deepen it and amplify it. So they need a lot more to do that with. And I'm being told now by some reliable sources that they have reestablished the line of communications, line of contact, line of support, whatever you want to call it, LOC, LOS, military terms, so they can get supplies. And I've been asking the question, is it maritime? Because I'm really worried about the submarines the Israelis operate in the Eastern Mediterranean. They would take those ships out in a heartbeat. We have a phenomenon right now, Danny, of ships all over the world. Don't talk about the Russian secret fleet as those mighty, powerful military giants the Baltic states do, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. Don't talk about the secret Russian fleet. Talk about the secret U.S. fleet. Talk about all the steamers and ships in the world that are going around with all kinds of cargo that have Lloyd's of London, for example, putting their agents in ports with clipboards, trying to figure out if the ship coming into port at that moment is one they've got insured and take them to task for turning their transponders off and so forth. So I'm sure that if they have a maritime connection for new missiles, ammunition, and such, that it is probably running around with its transponders off too, just as the Iranians are, just as the Russians probably are with oil, just as others probably are with oil too. By the way, all the JP-8 that Israel is getting that it needs for these massive airstrikes, other than the 300,000, I think it is, barrels a day, and that's not very much when you think about 20,000 going one flight, that they can refine is coming from ExxonMobil. Good old ExxonMobil shipping it to Israel. Is it going there on U.S. flagships? No, probably not. Is it going on tram steamers with, how is it going there? This is part of what I say that the empire is going to have to take very close scrutiny of as Israel gets deeper and deeper into the problems. And they are in deep problems.
Are you still up?